Oh, all right, I'm going live in LinkedIn.
Well, welcome everyone to today's event on advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm Kate Warren, Executive Vice President and Executive Editor at Devex, and very happy to welcome you to this event in partnership with the International Finance Corporation. So, diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, is all about creating spaces where everyone feels valued, respected, and has equal opportunities, no matter their background or identity. And in addition to just being the right thing to do, it's also a key driver of innovation, strengthens teams, and leads to better decisions by bringing a range of perspectives to the table. DEI also fosters a sense of belonging, which boosts employee well being, productivity, and retention benefits that extend to organizations and communities alike. So, in today's event, we'll be diving into how technology and innovation practices are advancing DEI efforts. First, in a fireside chat, we'll explore how AI can play a role in supporting DEI strategies, including in connection to risk management and long term success. And then following, we'll have a panel discussion with experts from organizations like the Red Cross, UNHCR, and DEI, who will share insights on exclusive recruitment, leadership, and actionable steps for fostering inclusivity in global development. If you have any questions along the way, please drop them in the comments section here on LinkedIn, and we will try to get to some of those during the event. If you would like closed captioning for this event, you can also look to the comments. We'll be posting a link to a YouTube stream where you can watch this event with closed captioning if that is your preference. But first, to set the scene, we would like to play a short video.
At IFC, we're bringing to life our values through innovative solutions like our Inclusive Communication Learning Program, a series of 15-minute scenario-based e-modules with characters who role model self-leadership, a growth mindset, and allyship, the elements we need to foster a more inclusive workplace culture. We're taking our learning to the next level by leveraging the power of generative AI with our Inclusive Communication Advisor. The advisor, colleagues can feel safe to ask questions that help them develop their inclusive communication skills. Take, for example, a manager who's preparing for an end-of-year performance management conversation. They can turn to the AI advisor to make sure they're giving inclusive feedback. The advisor can also coach a manager on how to communicate in a more accessible way for folks with dyslexia or ADHD. Meanwhile, for someone who's preparing feedback for a peer, they can ask that advisor what's important to keep in mind so their feedback is inclusive and considerate. The Inclusive Communication Learning Program and the Inclusive Communication Advisor are two ways IFC is leveraging technology to inspire positive action and enable workplace culture change.
Great. Well, thank you. So I would like to welcome our first speakers. We have Desmond Andrades, who's Manager for Architecture and Technology at the International Finance Corporation, Rani Puran, Program Lead for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at International Finance Corporation, and Sarika Narayan Singh, who's a professor at George Brown College and IFC Communications and Learning Consultant. So thank you all for joining us today. So I want to kick off with, you, Sarika. So we just saw this video introducing the Inclusive Communications Advisor, the IFC chatbot. Looks very cool. Could you walk us through, how it works and share some of the benefits it's bringing you at IFC?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Kate. So, the Inclusive Communication Advisor works by adding to IFC's existing learning ecosystem. And so, what I mean by that is we already have a robust catalog of modularized learning, facilitated discussions, and immersive learning experiences that are enabled by VR. So, actually, the Inclusive Comms Learning Program, that is one example of learning that people can access depending on where they're at and where they want to go in this catalog. So the advisor adds to and it complements this ecosystem, giving people access to this information just in time and depending on their scenario or situation that they're in. Now, I'd say from a learning perspective, one of the great benefits of this program or of this advisor is that it gets at one of the biggest barriers to learning. So I'm someone who's worked with adult learners for the past 10 years, and I know a lot of people are scared to say the wrong thing, to inadvertently hurt someone or come across as uninformed. And so, what ends up happening is we don't ask the right questions and we inhibit our learning. But because the advisor was designed within the World Bank Group's responsible use of AI guidelines, along with our personal data policy, staff can be reassured there's no third party that's accessing their information. So they feel safe to ask these questions and get down to the business of learning.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so, Ronnie, I'd love to hear how you see this chatbot fitting into IFC's overall DEI strategy and helping teams and leaders learn and develop the skills and knowledge needed to really ensure the DEI efforts are successful and sustainable, and also to that learning component of being maybe a safe place where they feel like they can actually learn these skills and how to be a more inclusive leader. So how do you see this helping those efforts, Ronnie?
Yeah, very happy to share the thinking that went into this and how we see the advisor as contributing to sustainability of our program and impact. So we have three strategic priorities. They're multi-year priorities at IFC. And for those that are at this event that may not know a lot about IFC, we are a member institution of the World Bank Group. And we focus on advancing economic development and improving the lives of people by encouraging the growth of the private sector in emerging markets. So we would do this by investing in projects, mobilizing capital, sharing our expertise. Internally, it's very important that we are obviously in the business of inclusion with our people because we're in the business of social and economic inclusion with clients and communities across the world. So how did this thinking inform what we were doing here with this advisor? As Sarika shared, we launched an inclusive communication learning program, and 97% of employees that took this program, either in the form of a facilitated discussion or self-paced, would recommend the program to a friend or colleague and would also apply what they've learned. At the same time, and I'm sure many individuals on this call can relate to this, it was difficult at the beginning to get adoption going. So we were thinking about how can we be intentional with the use of AI to solve this program of time. There's this perception that employees do not have enough time to invest in learning that may not be mandated. And this is what the advisor allows us to do. So we took the content from the inclusive learning program, which we know resonated with our people. We augmented that with external content. So the model was grounded in carefully curated content. And we've rolled it out as this advisor. So it launched about 4 to 6 weeks ago. And we see it as being integrated into our processes, putting it at the fingertips of people when they need it. As Sarika shared, people being able to ask questions in a safe space without the fear of getting it wrong. And ultimately, we'll judge the success by the number of people that will recommend this tool to each other. And this tool was not just developed with the 3 people that you see on your screen right now, Sarika, myself, and Desmond, who you'll hear from in a moment, but with 50 plus staff from across different geographies that are living this day to day. They helped build this content, and they are also working with us on the rollout of the advisor.
Right, thank yeah, and just a reminder for those tuning in live, feel free to add any questions you have in the comments. I'm sure there are many. Desmond, turning over to you, you're the manager of architecture and technology. So your team has worked closely with Ronnie's team, and many people were part of this, creating this bot. Can you talk a little bit about minimizing the risks associated with AI? There are a lot of opportunities, but a lot of concerns, and I think really talking about how your team approached the risk management of using a tool like AI that is still, new and unknown for some.
Has an AI strategy and a responsible AI framework. As we envisioning the solution along with Rani and Sarika, we looked at whether this advisor that we are building aligns with our AI strategy, aligns with our responsible AI framework. So what we did is after we've gone through that assessment, we identified this rich curated set of content that Sarika and Rani had put together, and then we used a industry standard AI model and grounded our content within that model. So the model was so it was leveraging the model, but it was heavily grounded with our content so that we are able to answer questions that are coming in from our staff around inclusive communications. So we've done that, and we've also been constantly updating the model or grounding the model with newer content or more enriched content that the team has been developing or continues to develop. And then there is a good feedback loop through which if we find the content is or the advisor is not providing relevant content for specific topics, then we have the ability to ground additional content in to make sure that the risk of with the models having inherent risk within them can be minimized to a certain degree by the use of grounding with the content that we have.
Thank you. Yeah, and we just had a question that came in that I think you touched on a little bit, but how is this customized tool, which obviously requires more time and resources to develop, different than just a general tools like ChatGPT? And so maybe you can talk a little bit to kind of the unique data that you have as a global institution, and what led you to create something that is highly customized for that context.
So the
Desmond,
content,
maybe you.
sorry, I think I can start and Sarika Rani, if you could add. The content is available through the one that Sarika and Rani have curated, but they are the content providers. What we do is then just integrate that within the ground that with the bot that we have created, and make sure that it is providing the data answers. But Sarika and Rani, over to you.
Yeah, so the content, a lot of it is IFC content and Sarika, I'll ask you to say more about the process for creating that content. But I mentioned that we curated both internal and external content. So the uniqueness of this bot from the content perspective is we have material in there that is unique to IFC, that is not available anywhere else. It's this knowledge transformation of the learning program material through a technology deployment. Sarika, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I think I can add a little bit more context because the first stage or evolution of this learning program was the inclusive communication learning. And those modules were developed with a co-creation group of IFC staff from different grade levels, working and stationed in different parts of the world. IFC, where we work in over 100 countries. And so it reflects the needs and the issues and the topics that were top of mind for our IFC staff. So I think one of the biggest distinguishers between something like Chat IFC and the advisor and something like Chat GPT is how tailored it is to our unique culture. And also the fact that folks are going to be giving us feedback. We work in different languages. Although the language of business is English, people do have different cultural nuances, and we want to make sure that the advisor keeps up with that and reflects people's different needs.
And I wonder if it might be useful to have Keske say a couple of words about prompt engineering, because we're investing a lot in the institution and building the capability around prompt engineering, and we also very carefully curated prompts for this advisor.
Thank you, Rani, for that question around the prompt engineering. So yeah, so it is really important for the users to understand, first of all, the difference between traditional, like a Google search engine, right, that people are used to asking like some keywords question, but this in general, generative AI technology is inherently different in terms of how it works. And the key and the benefit of it is how highly customized this is based on user specific question. So it's not like user would be asking, like, tell me about inclusive communication policies in general. It can really drill into some specific areas. And then if user has a customized question around how I have this content that I'm writing email. Can you rewrite it for me? Or I'm talking with my manager, in a evaluation situation. All these like really small details that you add into uh, ask in the chat really helps with the response. But also there is some slight risk around uh, asking that right question, and that leads to this concept called hallucination, where the bot either making up an answer or it's making a answer based on irrelevant content. But the benefit, so to the original question, the benefit of building it on its own rather than using the general ChatGPT, for example, is so that we first select the content on our own and ground our model with this information, but also we are validating and trying to minimize the risk of hallucination. Because maybe in some cases, right, like what ChatGPT is aware of about the inclusive communication is a bit different from IFC.
Yeah, thank you for that. And, so one of the concerns too, sometimes people have around AI is definitely can help combat bias, but sometimes, if that's baked in, it could help exacerbate bias. So particularly thinking about just the diversity of cultures and culture differences, we have another question here about how you kind of balance, because there are so many different cultures that are represented within IFC and World Bank Group. Yeah, how did you guys think about making sure that the content you're feeding in is not unintentionally exacerbating any biases that might have existed? Not sure who might to take that one on.
Sarika, do you want to take that, or would you like me to?
Yeah, I can begin, and then Rani, if I miss
Sure.
anything. So one of the things that we really did make sure to do is that it does reflect people's different backgrounds, but we also tested it for a fair bit. We have a robust DEI council with many different members, and they were part of the beta testing. We do tell folks, the advisor is a work in progress. We are all works in progress. And I think what's also really important to keep in mind is the advisor is not standalone, and it's not meant to replace all of the other learning tools and resources available, including everyone's individual professional judgment and intellectual abilities. So even the inclusive communication learning program, that is still an ongoing initiative that we have, that is a conversation starter to facilitate discussions. And then the advisor functions at the very end also and along the way to complement that learning and to meet people where they're at. Ronnie, over to you.
So I want to reinforce this point of professional judgment and the importance of it in particularly in the early days of rollout and adoption of AI, particularly in areas like diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the importance of critical thinking. And I was recently at a meeting, and there's this fear that AI will make us lazy. And actually, we cannot eliminate bias, okay? Not in the content in the tool, the models, or in ourselves. We can take mitigation measures and try and raise awareness of how those biases show up. And those are very much the principles that we're working with. And critical thinking and professional judgment is so important. And understanding, as Sarika shared, that this is one tool of several that is available to our people to use.
Yeah, and just really quickly in closing there, I'm sure there are people watching saying, wow, this seems great. I would love to try to do something like this in my institution. Some it might be feasible given resources. Some it might feel like, oh wow, that's something that would just be too hard to establish. But maybe Sarika, for closing, what would be your one piece of advice to those watching on how they could start moving towards something like this, whether it is a very robust tool like the chat bot you created, or even something that's smaller scale based on what they're able to do given the size of their institution?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is not to use tech for tech's sake. Of course, it's important to keep aware of the trends, and AI is obviously on everyone's radar. But talk to the people, your people, listen to what they need and what's actually going to complement them. Rani gestured to a lot of different problems and ways in which the advisor meets us based on our needs, and I think that's the most important: listening to people and figuring out what they need.
Great. Well, thank you all. It was really exciting to learn about this tool and actually be able to see through the video how it works. I have feelings probably some of the people watching might be reaching out to y'all to learn more about it, sparking some ideas. But thank you all for sharing this. I think it really helps set the stage of what is possible, taking advantage of technology, as you say, Sarika, making sure it's actually fit for purpose for your use. So we are going to move on to our panel discussion now, but please join me in thanking Desmond and Sarika and Rani. And now I would like to introduce, we have Adrienne Alberts, who's the Chief Diversity Officer for American Red Cross. We have Bobby Jefferson, who's the Global Head for DEI and Vice President, and also former Chief Technology Officer for Global Health at DEI. And we have Katty Bennett Sattler, who's the Director of Human Resources for UNHCR. So Adrienne, Bobby, Katty, thank you so much for joining us. So I am going to start off with you, Adrienne. So in a mission-driven organization like the Red Cross, how do you balance recruiting for technical skills, but also ensuring candidates align with your DEI values? And any reactions to some of the things that you learned about what IFC is doing in this space?
So Kate, first, thank you for having me be here to join you for the conversation. I am eager to be one of those individuals that follows up with IFC about the chatbot. When I think about our innovation team, it just gets me excited to want to dive into that and explore how we might be able to bring some of those things to our organization. But as I think about this notion of balancing and recruiting for technical skills and really aligning with our DEI values, I'm always nested in a few things first. One of those is remembering not to underestimate the motivation of individuals who want to do good in the world. Their individuals are driven to want to do good. They are driven to humanitarian efforts across all dimensions. And so I never want to underestimate that. And so then we always go back at the American Red Cross. We always go back and think first about how do we show up so that individuals with incredible talents across dimensions identify with us potentially as an organization for which they'd like to partner and or work with. And so that starts with really being thoughtful in how we communicate who we are as an organization and as we are in the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, by being very inclusive in the images that individuals see and the content that they see in all kinds of avenues around who we are as a mission-based organization. Then the second thing that we do, because we are really rigorous about this notion of aligning with our values and our fundamental principles in the movement. Diversity, equity, and inclusion at the American Red Cross is firmly embedded in our values. And they absolutely show up across the fundamental principles for the movement. And so we build a recruitment experience that will ensure that we explore for technical competency, but also intentionally look for evidence of alignment with values and alignment with our DEI principles. Those things for us can be as simple as ensuring that in each of our interviews, we include, behavioral questions that are literally asking for the evidence of how individuals have shown up in our values alignment in their prior work, and how they might show that in our organization. And then the last thing that I'll say about this particular piece is we also are looking for the underlying competencies that will ensure that people can align with our values and live out our experiences of DE&I successfully. And those are curiosity and learning agility. As I think of that combination of DE&I and technology, the notion of always staying curious so that we remain innovative is really critical. And we look for those experiences in our interviews. The other thing that I would say is learning agility, right? Technology is not static. The world's not static. And identities aren't static. And so this notion that we are looking for individuals with the learning agility to continue to remain abreast and aware is really important. So we are intentional in how we communicate about who we are so that the right talent will be looking for us as we're looking for them. We align around looking for evidence that the values alignment will be both in the candidate's experience and will showcase who we are. And then we look for those underlying competencies like curiosity and learning agility to make sure that we're finding the right matches.
Yeah, thanks, Adrienne. I think that learning agility speaks to some of the benefits of the tool that IFC showcased to us. So, Bobby, I want to move over to you. You have an interesting background that you've worked as a CTO and also as a chief DEI officer. So I'd love to get your perspective on how AI, data analytics, tech innovation can really just drive more inclusive decision making, and particularly in very diverse international organizations like DEI. DEI with
Great.
DAI.
DEI. Thank you, Kate. There's a lot of acronyms in this field. DEI, DNI, EDI if you're the UK, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So, it's always great to have a grounding on the different acronyms as well. So my background is in the technology side of things. And so, I've worked with when 3D printing and Internet of Things were the hot topic. And of course, blockchain. I was a blockchain expert as well, and playing that. And now AI, and in the future, probably, quantum computing. And so these, to me, are tools that we use to help do our work and amplify the organization. So from an inclusive leadership perspective, the question I have is, what does your organization look like or want to be in the year 2030? Right? Where is it that you want to go in that journey? And then the tools, whether or not it's AI or other types of new tools that are coming out, can help you make decisions towards that journey. So for me personally, where I've found the most impact under the DEI initiatives have been under accessibility, where there has been, we have projects and programs in Ukraine, or in conflict zones, or in Haiti or Afghanistan. And the challenge is real, that there's mental health and physical health issues. And so the challenge becomes you have staff who visit and then they return out of the country, but you have many people who are living in conflict zones and dealing with mental health issues. So, this is where AI and other technologies can help for those who are living in conflict zones, especially, women and families who have to deal with the constant stress. And of course, there's a stigma associated with mental health issues. So first, I want to applaud USAID and FCDO for actually stepping up and having a mental health coordinator and really embracing that, there's the real issues. And then the second part is the technology can actually help address where you don't have to, always go to the clinic using telemedicine, where you can have access to specialists and doctors. Or what's been game changing for me in the technology field, I spent 20 years trying to get clinical physicians and others to write down on paper the physician, clinician, patient interaction. And now just with a mobile phone and an AI tool, just listening passively, it can create the entire treatment notes for the physician and the ICD code or the insurance codes as well. So again, I see these as really game changing parts of the effort, and just making sure that we don't forget about accessibility. our people, veterans who've served, who are disabled, spouses of veterans and family who have to take care of people with dementia. So this is where I see the actual trend in growth of, if you really want to be a inclusive leader in the future, around accessibility, it will be something to really address.
Yeah, thank you, Bobby. I think that's such an important point about really that the inclusion aspect and supporting the well-being. And so Katty, UNHCR, obviously you have staff and working very challenging conflict areas and a lot of diversity globally within your workforce. So what are some of the innovative practices you all are employing on recruitment and even thinking about just equity inclusion within UNHCR?
So thank you, Kate. This is such a fascinating conversation. It's so timely, and I mean, I think what's important, as you just said, we are almost 20,000 colleagues, and we're in places where most people wouldn't dream of going on holidays, right? So it's really the places where challenging circumstances are at the core of the work we do. That's why we're there. And what's so important then is, and I actually believe the greatest driver of diversity, equity, and inclusion is allowing colleagues time for the things that matter. And that's where technology comes in and really offers this opportunity to streamline, simplify, and offer a more customized experience. So I spend less time on the things that where I don't add value. And we've been on a bit of a journey in UNHCR. We were, I think, the first UN agency to dabble in our own AI bot some 5 years ago for streamlining long listing and recruitment. Even at that time, looking constantly, how do we pair this up with the recruiters? So there was always the human factor, but it saved hours. And really set us off on a journey, our little tool, Aaron. And then when we implemented Workday 2 years ago, we got access to a lot more that has helped our colleagues to have customized learning journeys, recommendations for, you seem to be interested in these kind of jobs. This is what you're applying for. Maybe you want to augment your skills with these recommendations. So shaping more and more of that. But perhaps the biggest asset I find is having all the data in one place and being able to provide all of our managers with a dashboard that says, this is what your office looks like or your region looks like. Here's where you got some gaps in terms of diversity. Here's also where you have some opportunities, so that there's really all of that at a glance. And it gets really, really tangible when you have the data in front of you. It doesn't become about, oh, this one person over that person, which we often know happens in recruitment, but it really becomes, how do I have the right composition to do the right work? Because we know diversity enhances efficiency and accomplishment of sometimes impossible goals. So I have to say, it got very tangible this year, because I'm not sure that's the only reason. It's been a long journey, but we reached gender parity in all international professional categories for UNHCR this year. And that was a big step forward. We're almost there in our national professional category. We're missing one, and it's just a couple of points away. But it's a constant journey. And having the data helps holding us accountable. And it's a huge help for me and my HR team to really be able to have real conversations. So these are some of the things that I think have helped drive us forward. And I have to say, as an aside, so for HR, our strategy, our people strategy, is really around people, partnership, and technology. To put technology out there as one of the pillars has helped us drive the entire conversation on all matters that relate to people. And what I didn't expect, but I have really loved, is seeing the HR community embrace technology so much, from first being a bit skeptic to saying, how can we learn? And created a lot of innovation in this space, including develop a chatbot for HR advice that has since been adopted by the whole UN system. And then that's something that is just great, because it saves time. And it also allows us to be consistent no matter where you work. So we're big fans of how this can help us become more innovative, because there's always more to do.
Yeah, it sounds like the data has been really helpful for arming many institutions and your frontline leaders and being able to really leverage that data. Just another plug that if you do have questions, feel free to add them in comments on LinkedIn, and we will try to get to some of those. But Adrienne, kind of talking a little bit on data, also would love to hear how you are measuring the impact of your DEI initiatives, and then how you kind of translate that and the insights you get that into to further advancing your DEI initiatives.
So I just wanted to piggyback. I loved what Katty was saying. I also loved what Bobby was saying. So just this notion of empathy, right, in our work. When I think about that, and the healthcare work, and the mental health work, and the accessibility work, Bobby, that you were speaking about, we had the opportunity to bring empathy labs into the organization, and through the use of technology, we were able to put individuals in the position of managing work through the lens of a particular disability, and the impact that that had on our leaders and their willingness to be thoughtful about what accessibility means for the organization skyrocketed because of this notion that being able to have an experience that gives you just an inkling into what others may be feeling really leaned in. So I love that, Bobby. And it really helped us in an environment where we too have teams that find themselves in challenging circumstances supporting individuals at some of the worst moments in their experience. But how do we measure the impact of those things? It pulled me in what Katty was saying about putting information in front of people. I think for us, the first step in really being able to understand the impact of initiatives and then driving them into actionable work is to understand the current state and where we are and where we're going. And so, in addition to building very clear goals with very clear milestones and benchmarks about where we're trying to go, Bobby said that in the beginning. Where are we starting? Like, where are you going should be the ultimate starting point. We start there. We capture all of the quantitative data, but we augment that with qualitative data. So we are doing listening in the organization and in the communities that we serve to ensure that we are indeed meeting their needs while we center them, both our workforce and the communities that we serve. And that is one of the measures that we are using to really understand the impact. I think the second piece of that really ties back to what Katty said about this notion of accountability. So visualizing data so that leaders have it, I think, is a critical theme that we've been hearing in our conversation. Making sure that leaders can see with transparency where they are and aligned with where we are going. So the outcomes that we are trying to drive. We also are very thoughtful in this notion that seeing the data may not always immediately equate for leaders to what is the right steps to take in an actionable way around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so our team and DE&I partners with our leaders as they develop action plans to really be able to fully achieve the outcomes that we're looking for. And then the last thing that I'll add is the notion of accountability really helps us move further through action. And that accountability, I think, is what really creates the most significant impact because it allows us to honor our word and our commitment to our organization. And so we look at that in two ways. One is collective accountability. The entire organization has a responsibility to make sure that we achieve our goals. And we are doing that in transparent ways, like publishing an ESG report as a nonprofit, which is relatively rare. So we're sharing with the world, right, but very publicly who we are and how we are measuring up against our peers and community. We also share our demographics very widely with our entire workforce. So we lean in with transparency to create a collective accountability. And then we think about consequential accountability. How do we ensure that we are measuring through our performance how our organization is moving forward? And I would say most people hear consequential and they think about a negative reinforcer. But I would say what we've learned is the most powerful reinforcer of accountability in our organization has actually been praise. Praising publicly the things that we want to see repeated, really celebrating leaders and teams and areas in our organization where we're doing well, celebrating where we've had a real breakthrough in supporting a community, in achieving the resilience that the community wants to achieve, really have been ways that have reinforced for our organization how we show up and how we show up across as partners in the Red Cross Red Crescent movement.
Thanks, Adrienne. Bobby, I wanted to ask you a bit about kind of what you see as emerging trends shaping the future of DEI. We also got a question that I think is, we're both based in DC, where we have a new incoming administration here that has been, actively pretty hostile against the term or anything surrounding DEI efforts. So the question is about kind of how you manage this when many corporations are backtracking on DEI commitments. You do a lot of work with U.S. government, and we're anticipating there will be a lot of backtracking with this new administration. So how are you thinking about advancing these efforts within that context?
Great. Thank you, Kate, for the question, and those in the chat who sent the question in. So first, I'm on the board of Society for National Development, which is an international association in the U.S. And each week I receive an email or a link that says this organization Tractor Supply and have all backtracked from their commitments. And then I receive other emails where examples like Devex are doubling down in their commitment. So there's like there's two sides of it. And for me, it's all about the organization that I want to work with and join based on their values. So within my organization, DAI, one of the tenets and values for the past 55 plus years has been global citizenship. So, it's a global company. We respect the workplace. We treat everyone with dignity and respect. That's not DEI. That's just a core value of what we do. We've been celebrating, for example, December 3rd is International Persons with Disability Day. And, as an organization, both on the Society for National Development side and DEI side, we've been recognizing that before even the notions around DEI. Like that was just part of our core values. On other side is having all male panels as speakers, or not having diverse speakers when you're that is again, to me, isn't necessarily DEI. That's just a value that says this is how we're going to represent ourselves and be. And so no matter what the future holds, if you're working for an organization that has those core values of respecting global in the workplace and others, those things will live on. And the inclusion part is what I mentioned, which is make sure to include our veterans and our spouses of veterans and others who maybe have felt left out as well. So again, each week, yes, you'll see organizations that are modifying, changing their commitment, the different administrations. We've lived through multiple administrations. I've lived through on the technology side. And I want to say we're still here and we're still doing the work. And Devex and you and Raj are still dedicated. And so again, I don't necessarily consider this to be DEI, sort of in one respect, but just embracing the value of who DAI, Devex, and Society for Financial Development are and will continue to be, regardless of where things go in the future. So that's been my response, is holding on to the values.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we've all talked about DEI as well. Certainly, it's the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do. So, many reasons to try to convince people, no matter what their viewpoint is, on why this is important work. Caddy, I want to follow up with you. And Adrian mentioned a little bit about kind of the role of data, but then being able to kind of really translate that to steps and action. And you mentioned how you all reached gender parity across all of your classifications in your workforce. Maybe we could talk a little bit about how you use data to drive those decisions and that action.
So first of all, I have just commenting on what Bobby was saying. It's interesting to see that how we've kind of gone one way really strong. It's almost like flexible work, right? And now we're heading the other direction. I think when the pendulum starts to go like this, it usually goes up. So let's hope that that's where we're heading. In terms of data, I love in HR, I love using data as the great leveler of conversation, because it tends to be, I don't know what it's like in the organizations of those on the listening in, but in our organization, it often becomes we follow the loudest noise as opposed to the most deserving or critical group. And those are not always consistent, right? So for us, it helps to go back to say, if as we are right now. We have limited resources, but we need to get the maximum impact. Which area should we focus on? And to help our managers do that, of course, the dashboards help, but there is, and I think, Adrian, you picked up on this, is saying just because you have the data, that doesn't equate to knowing what to do with it or actually how to act on it. So we've seen that in some areas, especially we just piloted using technology. It's immersive in our system for employee engagement. So where the system allows for a dialogue, an anonymous dialogue within the team to say, here's what somebody makes a comment, the manager can go in and say, hey, I'd like to talk more about that. Would you be open? You can have a bit of a chat in the system, and then you can, if the other person is comfortable, take that offline into the real world, so to speak. Or you continue in the tool. What we've seen is that our workforce in the pilot, they were more keen to do this, but managers were very welcoming of the concept, but don't feel equipped. So I think a lot of the work also has to come on some of the basic stuff, which really comes down to people management. How do you manage your people? And how do we give enough attention that is probably the factor that makes the biggest difference? How do I engage with my manager day to day? That we know that people leave or stay with managers, right? So giving our managers enough space and enough time to feel confident and competent in this area. And in fact, we went as far as saying we're going to pause the implementation of the full rollout just enough to give our managers enough information, enough support so that they feel comfortable to go live with that. So that's one of those examples where you get access to a lot, but in order to make that a success, you kind of have to scaffold on both sides. So I think that's been really, really powerful. Overall, we do see that there is a real hunger to learn more, but because it moves fast, the upskilling piece has to move equally fast. And sometimes we as organizations aren't keeping up, and colleagues go out and learn themselves. And I don't think that's a problem. I think that's actually an asset, but that you're able to keep both supported. And I think the other piece, because you were talking about accountability, it's easy in the D&I journey to feel frustrated. So we have great diversity in our organization, but that doesn't always equate to inclusion or equity for that matter. And so how that's been our focus, really, to look at inclusion. And as we're using different means to measure that, to also remember to celebrate the small wins. Because it's very easy for managers to kind of say, where are we going? I'm not seeing any progress. And in this day and age where there's so many competing priorities, to help support on that journey, to also recognize the small steps, because again, it's sometimes the small steps that can make a bigger difference. And I think that's been pivotal for us in our journey. We're still very much on the journey, and I have to also give a big shout out to our employee resource groups. Because they keep us accountable, they come up with some of the best ideas, and it's a sometimes very intense partnership, but it's always a constructive one, and it's always one that moves us forward as an organization. And for that, I am eternally grateful for all the passion and dedication that they put in.
Great, thank you. And as you say, it is a journey, and so kind of closing wrap up. For our audience members that are watching that might be in different points of that journey in their organizations, could you just share kind of one practical step or piece of advice on how they could take steps towards building more inclusive recruitment and leadership practices? And Adrian, I'll start with you.
I would say, as I think about it at its foundation, it's one of the things that we took a lot of time to try to get right, is clearly defining what inclusion and inclusive means, I think, is a really important place to start. And that sounds really simplistic, but I mean taking it out of the conceptual, subjective space and being competency based if you can, right? Being very, very clear on what it means so that it is concrete, it is specific, and it's measurable. And individuals absolutely can build their confidence because, as Katty just said, they may feel uncomfortable leaning in, but we can help develop the skills to help them be confident to move through that discomfort. So I'd say that be really clear in how you define inclusion.
Yeah, so important. Bobby?
I would try to advocate for the audience to look at maturity models. So that way you can judge or be able to understand where you are and where you want to go. So one example is, we start off as an organization being a disability inclusive organization. And it's a self-evaluation, and it's just out of the FCDO, out of the UK, and because they have a global maturity model, 3 levels. And now we've progressed from being an inclusive organization to being a committed, inclusive leader in inclusive disability, right? So when you have a maturity model, it doesn't mean that you have at any one point in time, the answer, but it just shows that you're making progress. And again, that's the same thing happens on the technology side, right? The more you have a mature organization and standards, more things are repeatable. And it doesn't matter the leadership changes, organizational reorganizations, new administrations. If you've got a great maturity model and standards within your organization, using that framework will just help you through that journey where you want to go. So I'm a strong advocate of maturity models, whether or not software, technology, or organizational change.
Great. Thank you so much. Caddy, your thoughts?
First of all, it's a partnership, right? It's not the administration, it's not the employees, it's not anyone. It's all of us together. And in that partnership, don't be afraid to try new things. Really look at this as practice over perfection. It's a journey. And that's why it resonates what Bobby's saying. It's a maturity model, and that sets the agenda, but don't be shy to start. And there's real power in the communities around us that are engaged in this. Just from this call, I'm learning so much from the colleagues on the call, and don't be shy to reach out and ask. Like, I see you're doing this. We have learned so much from others, and we are always generous to share what we know, because like that, we build on it together, and it benefits everyone. I think the last piece I would say is really make this a leadership responsibility in your organization. That way, you will have so much more impact when you need it, whether it's when it's get a bit stormy or when you have a big moment to celebrate, because that really can truly unleash the power of the organization.
Yeah, I think you bring such a good point. And I think what was really been fantastic about all the discussions today is that all of the leaders here who are working on this and thinking about it, kind of sharing what they've learned and sharing their best practices with each other. And I think you probably all are very interested in and open to sharing with those who are tuning in. So if people do have questions or other comments, feel free to continue to comment on this LinkedIn post. This will kind of live, and you can share it too with others on LinkedIn that you think could benefit from this conversation, and feel free to engage in any follow-up conversations or questions or comments you might have about some of the discussion points today. Bobby, I know you're involved in a lot of groups that are working particularly within the U.S. government space. They're looking to advance these, so maybe you can share some of those resources, as well as the colleagues from IFC and Adrian and Caddy. But thank you all so much for sharing and really grounding. There's a lot of sometimes talk about DEI, and of course, we've talked about a lot of headlines out there that, as Bobby mentioned, can kind of go one of two ways. And I think this is really helpful in grounding the real work and progress that's been done, and actionable steps that organizations, whether large or small, can do to get started or advance on that journey. So Adrienne, Caddy, Bobby, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and time with us today. So we are going to close with Monica Oldham, who's the Manager for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the World Bank Group. So I'd love to invite Monica to join us and just share your reflections on today's conversation, hear any of your key takeaways or recommendations or things that struck you from the discussions we've just had.
Thanks, Kate. I found it to be a good conversation, both the initial panel as well as the second panel. and reinforced a lot of the things we're doing, but also a lot of really good ideas. So, some of the key things that I took away, especially about making technology relevant, not doing technology just for technology's sake. And Sarika, for instance, mentioned the VR. And I wanted to let everybody know the VR, the obviously virtual reality, it's a learning program that we started at the bank group 5 years ago. We call it Picture Yourself Included. And it brings together some of the things that we talked about. So, technology, building empathy. And it was how do we address building empathy for different groups, but not just do through e-learning. E-learning is a great technology tool, but it's not great for everybody. So working with our internal corporate solutions team, we built virtual reality, the full thing using goggles. So the first chapter was on sexual orientation, gender identity. So you are immersed in a situation, but you're meeting with other bank group colleagues. So all of the actors are internal. 2 years later, we did one on disability inclusion. Another couple years later, we did one that we called Trace, the Threads of Race, Caste, and Ethnicity. And we're now developing a new one on neurodiversity, which we will put out next year. So, how do you make it relevant? And so, one of the other things that I really liked was what is the question that you're trying to answer? What is the problem that you're trying to solve? And so, I heard this from a few people. It's not, again, it's not technology for technology's sake, but one of the questions asked is how do you evaluate technology systems for fairness and inclusivity before and after deployment? Well, why are you rolling out this technology? So if we're not looking at that and making sure that it matches with who we are, and I really liked that from Adrian about how do we show up? How do we look at the values? How do we living the values? It does no good if you're hiring somebody who's the best technical expert or the best expert in terms of the overall expertise if they don't live your values. And it's not saying that they have to match you exactly because that's when you have bias. But if they don't agree with your values, then it's just a disconnect. They might not be a best match for you. You might not be a best match for them. A couple other things that I really liked were measuring impact, but figuring that out from the beginning. Where do you want to go? I really liked what both Bobby was saying in terms of the maturity model, but also looking at, for Adrian, looking at the qualitative as well as the quantitative. So it's not just about the numbers. Everybody has data, but are you looking at the data? Are you looking at the information you pull from the data? Or are you looking at the insights that you get from that information? So how transparent is it? The more transparent you are, but also making sure that people understand what it is that they're using and why are they using it. The question came up about organizations backtracking on commitments. And my question to them is, how much of a commitment is it if you're that easily shaken? So I really liked what Kathy was saying about making it a partnership. If we're all in this, especially making it a leadership responsibility, then there's less chance that when something happens outside in the world, that you'll say, oh, this is no longer important to us. Maybe you call it a different name, but if you're still living to your organization's values and everybody agrees to those values, then it's a lot easier to stay with that commitment. One more thing that was, I thought, really insightful was how do we pull all of this technology together? It's easy to just go out onto Google or one of the other tools and say, this is everything. But is it relevant for us? There's so much out there. And in the international development space, it's even more critical because we have the different cultures, because we have the different nationalities, because we have different ways of looking at things like disability and soji and gender and race and ethnicity and caste, all these things. If we're not looking at it how we look at it, how our clients look at it, how our countries look at it, how the people who are affected look at it, then we're missing out on something. So how do we pull all of this together, whether it's the fantastic chatbot that IFC has built or other technology, so that we're evaluating it based on the way that we need it, but also that we're not building bias into the system by only having certain people or certain groups build it or put the data in. And I would say those would be some of the key takeaways that I have from this session.
Yeah, thank you, Monica. I think you make a really good point. I mean, the global development sector really can and should be a leader on these issues because it's so ingrained and the mission and the work that all of these institutions are doing and the very diverse both workforces that they reflect as well as the communities that they work with. So thank you all. And, partnership was a key theme throughout all of this. And we couldn't have done this event without our partnership with IFC. So thank you all for helping us bring these important conversations to the Devex audience. And thank you to all of our speakers for taking their time today. And for those of you who submitted questions, again, feel free to continue to engage in the comments on this LinkedIn post if you want to continue the conversation with other audience members or the speakers who will hopefully chime in if you have any additional questions for them. But in the meantime, thank you all for joining us, and we hope to see you in another Devex event soon. So thank you all.